My guest, most importantly, recognizes that rhythm is love and that much of his legacy has reverberated out into the universe, pushing back against the despair and the gloom that we all feel on a day to day basis. And I think, as the great Art Blakey said, my job is to wash away the dust of everyday life for the people that come in to support my music. And I think my guest has been on that path as well. Larry Zach, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Well, I didn't realize I was going to be on a show, but thank you for that. And good to hear your voice. Where are you in Arizona?
Sweating it out in Tucson, baby. Still hot.
Okay.
You know, Larry, I just wanted to ask you if you could talk to the audience about how music has been a healing force for you in your life, and how it has been maybe salvation during some of the harder periods of your life.
Well, it's always been something that I gravitate to quite naturally from a young age, and it's always been there for me. It's, my drive and my love of music and what I bring to it has always been something that I could count on. Irregardless of people, places, and settings, it's just something that's ingrained in me. And you mentioned like Art Blakey, and just a wonderful musician, and that kind of spirit around me has always been the thing that kept me going particularly from high school. And
can you talk about in high school? I'm not sure if you grew up in Detroit proper or not, but like Joe Podorczyk, were there teachers, or were there actually elders that you that mentored you in some way early on?
Yeah, well, my oldest brother, half brother, but I have two half brothers, and my oldest brother was my first mentor, and long ago, but he was very active in the studios with Motown, and
what was his name?
I just followed his lead.
What was his name?
He went by Chad Forrest, and if you look on Marvin Gaye's "What's Going On" album, he's given credit as the drummer, and he is the drummer no matter whatever they did after that. He's the original drummer on the whole album.
Dude, you're dropping serious.
Wow. Pardon me?
I mean, that's some serious. How do you spell his last name? Chet Forrest?
Yeah, with 2 R's, I believe he used. His real name was Philosoph. And then he, because many of us did this back then, you didn't use our full last name or something or another. But like for me, for instance, it's Zakowitz, but I go by Zach.
I did. Yeah, I did.
So.
So he was your half brother, and how early in your life do you remember him? I mean, for lack of a better, just like woodshedding in the house. Like, was he playing Was he playing clubs? Like, I'm curious about this. To me, that's Go ahead.
Yeah, before he left after he graduated from high school, he got married right away after high school, and he went into the Air Force. But I remember, he's about 11 years. He was about 11 years older than me, but he would bring his band into the kitchen in the house, and I was probably 6 years old, something like that. So that was my first contact with it, and then it just went on from there.
How would you describe, what was the instrumentation of his band at that time?
Well, it was acoustic bass, of course, drums, saxophone, and probably an accordion player.
Really?
Yeah.
Were they playing
they
like...
would do casuals and stuff like that. And there was a show out of the East Coast, I think it came from. I think it was called the Ted Mack Amateur Hour. And so somehow they got on that show, and they drove out there to do that show. So that's my first recollection of his success with music. And he was very well respected in high school. As a matter of fact, when I transferred to the public school, Hamtramck High School, I got in the band right away, no matter whether I could play well or not.
Dude, that's so great. That's like sports. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
Would you say they were? I mean, okay, so outside of the top 40 or the casuals of the bar mitzvahs, was he like a? I mean, there was a place in Detroit, outside of Detroit, called the Bluebird Inn, and I mean Coltrane used to play there, and Yusef Lateef, and obviously Elvin came out of Detroit. Was he like a bebop jazz kind of guy, regardless of the gigs that he played?
Well, he used to. He played at the Rooster Tail in Detroit with the big band,
Wow.
and they would do Motown reviews over there, and so Motown would bring in some of their players, but. Baker's Keyboard is the place that I remember.
We're going to talk about that, dude.
Yeah. So, Chet would play after hours, and he would do big band, jazz big band shows. And there was another place in Detroit I think it was called the Latin Quarter, So, besides doing let's call it more or less like legitimate shows at the Rooster Tail, they would bring in various artists from, around the country and what have you. He would do these jazz takeoffs here and there of big band things, and there was a guy by the name of Wilson that led one of the big bands. But so he was very active. But that happened after he came back out of the service, because he went right in the Air Force right after high school, and his wife, I don't even know, she probably just turned 16, and then shortly after that, they had children in Puerto Rico. That was where he was first stationed. So he picked up a lot of Latin influence there, Afro-Cuban stuff, which he brought back with him. But
Wow.
He was very confident. He could read anything. So his success in Las Vegas and Detroit was his intuitive skills that he had.
Also, so what year... do you remember him in the kitchen with the accordion, with the band? What years basically was that?
That would have probably been in, the mid-50s.
The mid-50s. This is so heady, man. So, okay, you get in the high school band. Were you... It was interesting talking to Dallas, and I'm not really surprised, but I mean, it wasn't like, at 45 years old, in my naive little mind, I'm like thinking that it was all this big melting pot, and you guys were going to the black clubs, and and then the reality was were you aware or hip to? I mean, Dallas and Catfish went down to the corner, and I mean John Lee Hooker would play there at this bar. I'm just wondering about your exposure outside of the radio to the visceral, like the black music of Detroit, whether it was C.L. Franklin's church, where Aretha was, or Sanctified Churches, or the 20 Grand. Baker's Keyboard obviously was a major bebop, post-bop thing, but how hip were you to the live black music of Detroit?
Well, very much so, because I think that it was just, it just kind of happened naturally. And I, at a young age, I was playing in nightclubs. I think when I got into about the time I got into the 11th grade, I started playing with Dallas's older brother, Catfish Hodge. And so I would go to, after hours, there was a after hours bebop place, and I don't remember the name of it, but I would go, and, it was mostly an audience of black folks there, but I never had any fear of any of those kind of things, because I grew up I had friends in high school, and it was a mixed environment, and we all got along and had a great time, and I learned from them, and we became friends, and it was a different situation. And now I remember what you're talking about, David's Blue Room. That was right at the end of the street where Dallas and Catfish grew up.
Yeah, exactly, dude. But then the club that I'm forgetting now, were you playing at the that bowling alley with Catfish?
Yeah, I think that was one of the first bar gigs we got.
Like East Side Lanes or something was called? I forgot the name. Lanes.
Oh, East Warren Lanes.
East Warren Lanes, yeah.
Yeah, it's on Caju and Warren. But before that, we started playing in teen clubs and college parties and stuff like that.
So I want to read you this. This is just a very little brief excerpt from my interview with Dennis Coffey. But he said, I used to go to the Minor Key in Detroit. I was too young to go to the West End Inn. I'd hear older musicians in the record store talking about it, but I was only in high school. Now, he used to hang out with Wes Montgomery. I mean, he talks about this place called the Drone Lounge in Detroit. Were you able to? Did you have the chops to? I mean, Catfish wasn't playing jazz per se. It's pretty raw. It's pretty blues based and very psychedelic and heavy, which is also very much part of that Detroit scene. You know, I just wonder about if you could talk maybe a little bit more, like on a global level, the idea of when I think about Joe Morello. And I think about, I mean, Blakey and Elvin reinvented it, but even Max Roach, I mean, so many of these cats, like, they were so tasteful on the drum kit.
Oh, yeah.
And they were, they you know what it is? I just want to get the question out, then you can riff any way you want. It just was like, you know, they treated it as an accompanist instrument. And over time, as the decades went on, drummers got louder and louder and louder to the point where, like, it sounded almost like, specifically the bass drums, it just started to sound like machine gun fire. And I wanted you to talk about like the aspect of, even if it wasn't in a jazz setting, can you just talk about how you learned to feather the bass drum in any musical context? Because to be honest with you, that is a completely lost art in music.
Well, I still work at all of that stuff. The more we know, the more we think we know, the less we know, really.
I love it. That's right.
That's the way the universe is.
It's always that way, man.
I was just exposed to all of this stuff very early on. I used to go to a blues club in Detroit called the Chessmate. And I would hear people come in and play at the Chessmate all the time, from folk artists to rock and roll artists from New York that were doing things that they were like pre-psychedelic. But a lot of blues people came into the Chessmate, and they would have after-hours jazz. There was a drummer that was around Detroit. His name was Steve Booker. And
I've never heard
outrageous.
That. Oh my
Steve
God!
Booker was something else.
Holy
if you never
cow,
heard of Steve
man!
Booker, you got to inquire about him, because
He
used to play at this club, and he would just play by himself. He had it.
Oh my God, dude! This is unbelievable.
Astounding, really. And you know, he would do outrageous things. Like one time, I remember being at the Chessmate, and he lit his drums on fire. So he's like, Keith Moon, eat your heart out, right?
Right.
So. But, I mean, he was accomplished. And then he eventually, I understand, I think he moved to New York. But, he could play all these different things, all these different time signatures and so forth. But it was just being exposed to what my brother had around him. And I just learned by watching. And he would take me down to the Rooster Tail when they would do the Motown review thing. And they would bring in Benny Benjamin to play drums, and I asked my brother. I said, "Can I sit up on the stage where nobody can see me?" So, he made arrangements for that, and I was sitting right on the back of the platform, and I got to. This is a big band setting, very nice supper club. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Rooster Tail.
I know. I love the name, dude. Never heard of it.
Right on the Detroit River. It was owned by the Shana brothers, and they were into the speedboat racing thing. But it was beautiful because they built this beautiful nightclub. And Buddy Rich played there. I mean, you name it. There was all kinds of people that played at the Rooster Tail. And then they built an upper deck for the rock and roll people, and I played in the upper deck while my brother was playing downstairs.
Dude, that is so freaking cool. I mean, that is
I know.
Hold on for a second. I just want to be clear about. So the review was when the review would come in, like they'd bring the actual studio sharks from Motown to play those gigs, like Benny Benjamin and Jamerson and those cats.
They would. So like they would have the charts the horns and all of that.
Right.
They would bring in their own rhythm section. So Chet would sit out, but, I got to hear it. So
I cannot. Can you talk about just the feel that those guys? I mean, there were no drum machines. There was no click. I mean, there was no playing to the click. There was no playing straight beats. It was like they were making up. I'm not saying they were making up. Those grooves stood the test of time, but I mean, I just feel like my generation and younger. There's so much. The ability to perseverate and focus on very incidental things can really hang you up. Those guys didn't have time to do that. I mean, Coffee said they were expected to do one song an hour at Motown, 3 songs in 3 hours. You had to knock it out. And those reviews must have been swinging. I mean, I can't even imagine what that must have been like.
It was a lot of fun, yes. It was definitely, for a young kid my age, it was great to be exposed to that. And my other brother, Rich, Rich and Chet had the same father, but my father raised them. They didn't really know their father. He left our mother at a very early age. So we basically were in the same house under the same roof until Chet left for the Air Force. And then me and Rich were still living in the house with my mother and my father. But
I did.
Yeah. So my brother Rich was very much into R&B music, and he was very much into the blues. So he would bring blues records home, and I would listen to them. And then when he was playing them, then I would play them on my own, and I would play to the records. I didn't even have any drums or anything like that. I don't even know if I had a pair of sticks, but I would get pencils or whatever and play to them. And I just... I had a love for the blues music right away, and the jazz, which was an offshoot of that. So, it's nice to be exposed to that. Both of my brothers were influential in that regard. And so, and then when Chet came back from the Air Force, he started working in some of the nightclubs in downtown Detroit, like the Brass Rail and places like that. And then eventually... his name got around, and he got hired to work at the Rooster Tail. And it was through the Rooster Tail and the musicians that were in the band, the big band.
Sure.
That's how he got exposed to Motown, and he would start coming in to do sessions at Hitsville. And what they would do is, like, if they wanted drum fills over whatever Benny did or somebody else did, there were 3 prominent drummers in Motown. Uriel, Jones, and Pistol.
That's right, Pistol Allen, Benny Benjamin. That's right.
Yeah, and so so Chet would come in and he would just add colors. Sometimes they would overdub drum fills and things like that.
God.
And eventually he played on some tracks, and the biggest one was, of course, with Marvin Gaye and Dave Vanderpit, who was the bass player at the Rooster Tail Orchestra. He was the one that did all the orchestration and arrangement for the What's Going On record, the album.
Now, because he's your brother Chet is definitely not listed as wasn't playing colors on that. He was playing the drums on that.
Yeah.
But he didn't get credit on the album for that.
Yes, he did.
He did.
Yeah, he gave. Marvin Gaye was the first time Motown actually gave credit to any of the musicians. Unfortunately, it took them quite a long time.
It sure did. You're right, yeah. You're right, because you look at any of those, like, mid to late 60s Motown, Gordy stuff, it's just Martha Reeves and the Vandellas, or you don't even know who the accompanists are.
Right. So if you look at the original vinyl 33, you'll see all the musicians listed and my brother's in there.
Oh my God!
So that was a big deal. And at the time that was going on, I was playing with one of the rock and roll bands in Detroit that was doing very well, and the band that I was in, Savage Grace, was a combination of all the elements that we all love to play. I mean, we combined not only the rock and roll and psychedelic aspect of it, but jazz and classical music.
Wow.
And
man.
Yeah, the two guys in the band that were older than me were very accomplished. That was Ron Koss on guitar and John Senor on piano. And both of these guys were like, they were ahead of me, but they pulled me along. And then I pulled along the young bass player, El Jacquet, because he came in as like the, if I could say, the Morrison from the Doors.
Oh, he came in from that kind of angle, yeah.
Yeah, the whole sex appeal kind of thing.
He has that. I mean, he has that. There's I don't even know. When I saw that name, I said, "Who is this guy, man?" Some sort of mystique. So, just going back for a second, Savage Grace, one of the greatest names for a band I've ever heard in my life. How did you guys actually link up? Because the band, the way and I haven't ever seen that LP or those LPs you guys made. But just the band that came into my mind when you were describing the sound of the music was that band, The Flock, out of Chicago. Did you know them at all?
I knew of The Flock.
Yeah, of the Jerry Goodman. There were elements of like rock and classical and jazz, but how did you guys?
Oh, right. That's kind of the way that we drifted, but we had a lot of classical elements.
Yeah, that's fascinating to me. So,
yeah,
how did it all? Was there a definitive moment when you guys all met, or did it just sort of, just like we talked about?
It kind of evolved because we were working in some really nice nightclubs, including the Rooster Tail. Like I said, the Upper Deck was one of the places that we eventually played on a regular basis, and then there were a few other places. But it was a band that consisted of Dennis Kaverick and John Cena, Ron Koss, and Gary Pregg, and myself. And we were just covering a lot of popular music, and mainly we were a bunch of Beatles freaks.
Sure.
Yeah, so as the psychedelic music started to infiltrate everything, we became more and more interested in that. And so, to make a long story short, at some point we decided to get out and test the waters and play in a concert-type situation,
Sure.
And I think we opened for Dick Wagner and the Frost.
Oh, my God.
They were a really great band, and they showed us how it was done. And we were like a bar band out of place. So,
Dick Wagner and the Frost.
Yeah.
So explain, you're talking about he taught you sort of the entertainment element of music, or what was it that stood out and gave you guys some enlightenment, so to speak?
Well, after we really heard what was going on, we needed to make an entire shift in the way that we were going to approach the music. So basically, like I said, to make a long story short, I came home and told my wife, we were married less than a year, I said, I'm quitting the gig, and we're going to start rehearsing, and we're going to be doing this kind of stuff. And so we just had a formula that we decided that we needed to change if we wanted to get into playing what we saw as an undercurrent from everything that was happening on the West Coast with the Monterey Pop Festival.
Sure.
And so we changed. We got a bass player who could sing, which was El Jacquet, but we had a real strong. Al was very smart, so he did on the bass what he could do. But Ron and John were really accomplished. We did all of these instrumental sections and all of these pieces of music, and the albums were never really did us any justice.
That was the one question. Okay, so I want to be very clear. When you guys were just a bar band, so to speak, playing the Upper Deck at the Rooster Tail or wherever, you would say you had no formula, and then after you saw Dick Frost, you were like, we need to get a little bit, I don't want to say tighter, but to have because Monterey Pop, when I think of the West Coast, one of my favorite bands, and I never saw them, was the Grateful Dead, and people that listen to Grateful Dead has no reflection of their live performances. And I love that. And to me, it's like, did you think as a band, when you went to your wife, you had to make course correction because if you wanted to cut an album, you were going to have to become, I don't want to say a formula trip band, but you had to get a little bit tighter.
Well, it wasn't a matter of getting tight because
that wasn't the right word. Yeah, that's the wrong word.
It was a matter of changing the kind of music that we were doing, and we needed to do original music, and we needed to do our own interpretation of covers of other tunes, and how we were going to do that, and allowing ourselves to have the room to have instrumental parts in the music, which would allow for our freedom to be able to express ourselves. I mean, I was playing garage drums all over the place. You know what I mean?
That's the kind of that's the Larry Zach I want to hear, man. I love that stuff. But I get it. Yeah. No, I mean when you say garage drums, like, was it almost like I don't want to say punk, but you were just like, it was not as refined maybe as you wanted it to be?
No, it was very refined, but it wasn't restricted to playing, I do a drum fill here, or we're going to do this kind of thing. So we all put our ideas, and rehearsed like 5-6 days a week out off a 26 Mile Road at a friend's guest house, in the sticks somewhere where nobody was going to be disturbed. And we did that until we finally worked it out. For instance, probably our biggest tune, I'll call it, was All on the Watchtower. So
I'm looking at it right now. Yeah, written by Bob, sung by Al Jacques.
Yes, but the whole thing was during this time is when Hendrix came out with his version of All Along the Watchtower. But ours was completely different.
I got to listen to that, man.
I'd say the energy was the same, but the interpretation was really different. And we had the opportunity to open for the Jimi Hendrix Experience twice in the summer of 1970, I believe it was, in Madison, Wisconsin, and St. Paul, Minnesota.
I cannot believe you're blowing my mind right now. And
it was just him and his band and us. And it was just phenomenal. It was really great.
I want to ask you about Savage Grace. I mean, clearly you guys made a concerted effort to create solos and parts within songs, and had somebody approached you and said, "Hey, if you do this," I'm just curious about how you wound up. And I know it was very common at that time, all these regional hotbeds, and how did you wind up securing a record deal? To me, it's like you got to sing for your supper, and if you're, I mean, obviously you're rehearsing a lot, but that means that you're taking less gigs. So you got to believe that
we didn't work at all. As a matter of fact, Sharon's mom and dad, my wife's mother and father, they started bringing us groceries over.
I love this, dude. I freaking love this.
And we had Sharon got pregnant 4 months after we got married, so I mean there was a baby involved and all this kind of stuff. And I come home and say, "Guess what?" And she had to quit her job at the General Motors Tech Center, so she was making really good money. I was making really good money, and relatively speaking, for a nightclub band. But we got along very well until this whole awakening happened, and when you're young, you can take those kind of chances. So we did, and it sort of evolved before we made all this change. It started to happen when we were working in the nightclubs, in the Rooster Tail and so forth, because Ravi Shankar came along with the Beatles, so we had a piece of music called the Raga.
My God!
I played a long drum solo in it, and Ron played an incredible tonal type of solo in it, because it's kind of like a modal kind of music, And so, I mean, we started experimenting before we made any changes like that, and then we branched out and we played a couple of these concerts. We did decide, okay, we're going to take the night off in the nightclub. We're going to go play this place and open up for so and so. And obviously, we have some sort of contacts that got us the opening, and that's where we learned, okay, well, not only are we having to do these kind of musical changes, but there's a whole sound factor involved in it. So it was quite a process that happened, if you look back on it, rather quickly.
Yeah, it's quite an awakening because you
Yeah.
you were playing the upper deck of the Rooster Tail probably 68, right? Or 69?
Yeah, 60, 67, 68.
Right, so within a
Yeah.
couple of years, you guys had the awakening. Can you talk about, I mean, it seems almost, in today's world, how did you have connections? I assume through the record label, maybe you got hooked up with Hendrix and cats like that, but how did you get to be able to open, how do you open for those cats?
Well, the thing about it is there was a whole scene that developed in Detroit with this whole psychedelic movement. Right?
Yeah, totally.
The Grandy Ballroom, the East Town Ballroom. So that eventually started to really kick in, and we got involved in playing on those kind of gigs. But because there was this whole support of the local musicians in Detroit, people were coming out to pop festivals, and we started to get that kind of exposure along with Brownsville Station, the Wilson Moore Pursuit,
Right.
Dick Wagner and the Frost.
Oh my
and
God!
There were so many bands that were starting to really, Iggy and the Stooges, and so everybody was getting their notoriety, so to speak, and we were just having such a great time with the audience, and they were so receptive, and they were enjoying what we were doing. It was our take on what was happening on the West Coast, and so it evolved from there. So all of a sudden, all of these pop festivals started springing up because it became the big thing after Woodstock, and so we started playing that. And then when you have these pop festivals, well, they have to bring in names that were already hitting either on the radio stations, on underground radio like WABX and stations outside of Michigan. So they would bring in, the Average White Band, or they would bring in, you name it, people, Jethro Tull.
Sure.
They would start, because they needed to have a 2 or 3 big name acts
to bring cats in. Totally.
Yeah. So, and then they would add, 25 bands from Detroit, including Bob Seger and before the Silver Bullet Band and all that happened. And
can you talk? I mean, this is so amazing. Where were these pop festivals? Were in downtown Detroit?
No, they were spread out all around. They were. I remember what was the one? There were different parks that would allow it to happen, and I don't remember the names of them now. And then it branched out to where they were having the festivals at places like,
It's okay. No, I mean, the point is that these things were happening quite a bit, and then there was an incredible amount of live support from
exposure.
A lot of patrons coming out to support. I mean, the live local musicians from Detroit.
Absolutely. So, that's the way word got around, and then you start to make headway that way, and so it starts getting to the local reps for the record companies, and they come out to see the bands play and see what the hell's going on in Detroit. And that's, so the next thing that happens is after we played, and like a lot of the other bands played, they say, hey, these guys are pretty good, maybe we ought to book them on the next festival. We had our first liaison to all of this stuff was a wonderful person and disc jockey, Jerry Lubin. And wow. Jerry Lubin was part of the whole underground radio WABX.
Wow.
So are you familiar?
No, I do. Please, please break this down. That was sort of underground radio in Detroit proper? Or?
That's what they called it. That was one of the underground stations like they had in various other regions, New York, Chicago, the West Coast, so they had underground radio.
Sure.
And underground radio was playing all the things that you wanted to hear, because the pop stations were playing all the middle of the road things. Sure, there was some good things being played on the pop stations, like What's Going On, for instance, and tunes that were breaking through, that were part of this kind of psychedelic movement. But it was underground radio that was exposing the local areas, so that people heard things that were happening in their neighborhood, basically.
Absolutely.
And
I remember.
Grace was one of them, along with all these other bands in Detroit. So Jerry exposed us. We handed him a 4-track tape from Ampex recorder that we did in the piano player's living room, and this is before we even changed personnel in the band and fully made a change, but it was part of the evolution. So we took a tune called Shapes of Things, which was who did Shapes of Things? It was one of the European bands that had a hit on it. So we did it our own way and with our own take on it. And then we did a gospel tune that was done by a jazz group called the Three Sounds, and it was
Gene Harris, man, come on.
That's Hymn to Freedom. They recorded Hymn to Freedom.
Whoa.
And now Hymn to Freedom was one of these traditional songs.
Yeah.
It was a hymn, really.
Right.
And it was called Hymn to Freedom. And John Senor knew of that particular tune because he listened to these records. And so he brought it, and we did our version of Hymn to Freedom. So we handed these two songs to Jerry at WABX, and when he listened to it, his mind was blown. So in his mind, he was blown by this interpretation of these two songs. So he started playing it on the radio, and then that's how it kind of got started with getting that kind of exposure.
Well, I just want to be clear, though, that this is so in light. Well, first of all, when I interviewed Charlie Musselwhite, he was living in Chicago and playing music and cutting records and really just working at a factory. And it turns out all this underground radio in the Bay Area was playing his stuff. So when he moved out there, he already had a fan base. I mean, this stuff is like, you can't make this stuff up. It's what was how far was the reach of that particular pirate station? I mean, were you able to get it all over Detroit?
Well, basically, yeah. I don't know what the strength of their signal was, but it certainly was powerful enough to, reach out. I don't know exactly how far in Michigan, but it could have gone all over Michigan, as far as I know.
So it's fair to say that you were getting. I mean, he was a big advocate, and do you remember the driving down the road and or in your house and hearing one of those tracks that came on, Shapes to Come?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it was, it was elating to hear yourself on the radio and think, wow, this is really great. We're hearing something other than,
oh my God,
the mamas and the papas.
Absolutely.
I mean, they're great, but, this is what we were doing. This is what Detroit was doing on the side. Aside from Motown, this is what else was going on. So,
I'm curious about just before I forget. Did you know Mutzy at all? His dad. He was one of these guys, totally in the psychedelic rock vein of Detroit. His dad owned a bar downtown Detroit called Anderson's Gardens. Very dubious place, a lot of hookers. But he cut an album with Mike Theodore and Dennis Coffey. That's the only reason I brought it up. I'm curious. So did this DJ, through radio play, wound up getting you a record deal? This is fascinating.
Actually, he was very much responsible to it, and then he had to back up because it was deemed, what do they call it?
Unethical?
Unethical, but there's a term for it. I can't remember what it is right now. I can't remember a lot of things.
That's all right, dude. We're all going to get there. Yeah.
But anyway, there's a legal term for it, and So eventually he backed out, but he was a great supporter. He actually came up with the name for the band, and he was a part of the underground radio. There was Dan Carlisle and Dave Dixon. These guys were DJs. That Dan Carlisle came out to the West Coast. He worked on KLOS for a long time. He worked up in San Francisco. Jerry came out here for a while also, but then he ended up moving back to Michigan and with his family. And I knew Dennis Coffey and Mike Theodore and those people, but they were older than myself.
They were older because when I interviewed Dallas, he was like Larry Zach's older than me. So he was like he was talking about. So Coffey and Theodore were a little bit older than you.
Yeah.
Yes. I just want to be but because it looks to me like that these albums were recorded in Los Angeles. Is that right?
Yeah, we started in Detroit at Artie Fields Productions, and Artie Fields was basically he used to record a lot of legitimate jingles for TV and radio. And my brother Chet was involved in doing recordings for him, and then eventually I got involved doing recordings over there too.
Oh, that's so
great! A young
great.
kid trying to,
Yeah, you're doing Suds and Duds commercials. It's great. You're making some dough.
Yeah. It was great because it was all legitimate. We got paid through the union. We got residuals, and that kind of environment doesn't exist anymore.
Wait, hold on. You got residuals from every time the commercial would play?
Well, what you get paid for like 13 weeks or whatever the contract was. Say you recorded something for the Detroit Free Press or whatever. Right. And then if they decided to use the commercial beyond that point, then they would have to pay through the union for a reuse on that, and so we would get paid again.
Wow.
Just like the actors have, I'm sure, agreements on TV with reruns of Seinfeld.
Oh, absolutely.
Friends,
yeah, absolutely.
What have you.
Yeah.
Years ago, they didn't have so much of that. It depends on what the scenario was. But anyway, so Artie Fields was the first place we tried to record. It didn't quite work out because it was an attempt on Artie Fields Productions to try to do this. Warner Brothers brought in their own engineer and our producer from Warner Brothers also, and it didn't quite work out, so we had to transfer everything back to Los Angeles, and then we had to leave Michigan for a month or so, the four of us, plus our road crew that we had to help us with various things in the studio. And
well, let's just go back for a second. I mean, how did Warner Brothers corral you guys?
Well, there was 3 record companies that came out to see us at least, and it was Atlantic Records and Vanguard Records and Warner Brothers.
That's so freaking classic. Vanguard would have been sick, by the way. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. We did record something for Vanguard before we made an entire switch in the personnel in the band, and it was part of the evolution.
Oh, before the Enlightenment period, you actually cut something for Vanguard?
Yeah, we cut 245s for them.
Those made it to the public? I got to get my hands on that. I mean, that's insane.
Yeah, I don't know how much airplay they got. They were not really great tunes. They were an attempt by us to do something different, but
oh my god!
I'm trying to think of.
So you're approached by 3 major record labels, and Warner's offered you a 2-record deal. Why'd you go with them?
I guess it was a better deal.
Yeah.
I mean,
well put. That's right. I hope.
Ahmet Ertegun came out.
Yep.
And we actually sat in the living room with him when we decided that Warner Brothers was the way to go. Do you recall he just passed away recently, the owner or the CEO?
Yes, dude, Clarence Avant.
What's his name?
Was it Clarence Avant from Sussex? Or that was a local cat?
No. It was another name, well-known name. He was in charge of Atlantic Records. So he came out to see us. And the guy from Vanguard, he came out to see the band again. But we decided to,
Was it Joel Dorn came out to see you from Atlantic? Or
No.
I'm trying to think who that was.
I could think of the name. I think he was Middle Eastern. His name was, it was a Middle Eastern.
Yeah. Avakian. George Avakian, maybe. No, you know what? Also, I'm curious. You may not remember this, but for Vanguard, that cat's name was Maynard Solomon. Anyway,
Maynard Solomon?
Yeah, for Vanguard. It's amazing. I guess maybe the best question is, they felt that you guys had potential to make radio-friendly hits?
I guess so. It was shortly after they recorded Janis Joplin there.
Right.
At the studio in New York. And it wasn't Bob Shepard. It was, the owner he flew us out in his airplane, believe it or not. He came to Detroit, flew into Detroit, not Metro, but the Detroit local airport, and flew us into New York, put us up, and we recorded at the studio. And the only other artist that he had in there was when Janis Joplin recorded her hit there.
Holy cow.
So we were the next in line, but of course we didn't have a hit record. So, but the band changed quite drastically as far as its musical content and where we were going. So anyway, that was, that's where it all started with that. But it was a great experience. Easttown Ballroom, Grandy Ballroom was phenomenal. With the MC5 was the home.
Oh, sure, my God.
Grandy Ballroom. And so, like Jerry Lubin, he had a relationship with who was the underground leader in Detroit at the time. Do you recall him?
You're hanging me out to dry. No, dude, this is before me. I don't know. I wish I knew.
Yeah. Okay. So all familiar names, but I'm having John Senor. He's not much on doing any kind of interviews, but he has a good memory and he would remember.
Well, if he's up, that's fantastic. It would be great to fill in the blanks. But the thing is, I actually wanted, when you got to L.A., it's fascinating. It says that I interviewed Bruce Botnick, but his brother engineered this session. Is that right?
Bruce Botnick's brother? I think so. I would have to look at the credits,
Yeah, I'm looking here at Douglas Botnick. I mean, what was that vibe like? Did you all hit at the? I'm talking about the one with I'm looking at Savage Grace 2 actually. All along the Watchtower, Hymn to Freedom. Actually, It looks like Hymn to Freedom was written by Oscar Peterson.
Okay, there you go.
By the way, Oscar Peterson used to play quite a bit at the Chessmate. When I interviewed Gordon Lightfoot, he talked about seeing Ray Brown and Ed Thigpen down there.
You interviewed Gordon Lightfoot?
I sure did, yeah.
So Gordon Lightfoot's producer was Joe Wissert from Warner Bros.
Yeah, sure.
And Joe Wissert was our producer.
Oh, my God.
On the first record.
Classic.
On the second record, it was John Haney. And John Haney was also the engineer.
Yeah, I'm looking. Joe Wissert.
Brought Bruce Botnick in on that.
Well, it was actually this. If they're saying it was his brother Doug Botnick.
Doug Botnick.
And the other thing is that it's so classic because Bernie Krause, who I also interviewed, played Moog synth apparently on this. This is the second one. What was the LA experience? Was there a lot of overdubbing, or did you all hit at the same time?
No, it was done live, and if any overdubbing had to be done, it was only because either something was unsatisfactory or it could be because there would have been a lot of these tunes as far as the instrumental parts go, had to be done all together.
Explain why. My favorite process of recording is what you're describing. But why did it have to be that way?
Well, very much different than today. It wasn't.
I know.
Because it was necessary that we all were able to respond to one another in the moment.
Huh.
Irregardless of the fact that By this time we already knew the structure of the tunes, but when it came to the instrumental sections, the excitement and the energy that needed to be put into it couldn't be something where, okay, well, I know that after 8 bars I go into this section, and then 8 bars I go into that section. You could do it that way, but that was not the way we had developed these songs. So we needed to record it as a live recording, and if anything needed to be fixed, then if there was enough separation, Ron could maybe fix something on the guitar or something on the keyboard, but it basically had to be done live, and only if something was fixable that wasn't agreeable to everybody, and say, oh, well, that doesn't sound good, but everything else is great. Can we fix that? That would be basically the vibe on that, because it was so necessary, like in a jazz kind of format where you want to be able to.
Oh, I love it. I freaking love it, man. No, today they don't want that excitement and that energy. They want it to be sterilized and sanitized.
No. Yeah, and a lot of the fusion players, name guys like Weckel and Vinnie Caliuta. I'm just naming drummers, but it happens through all of the instrumentation. They can send a file to that person, and they can go in the studio and record their part, send it back and say, is this acceptable? Does it work for you? And if they say blah, 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 well, then they can alter it, but it's not that same kind of response.
Yeah, it's called like pulse and heartbeat and tension and release, and even if you played those tunes thousands of times, and yet it's still, you get giddy in the studio. Would you say that most of the tracks on those records were first or second takes?
Absolutely.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, but the main part that took the longest was like getting drum sounds and stuff like that. And you can't spend that much time in the studio today anymore. So
I know. You see, that's the cost prohibitive nature of it all. Yeah.
Yeah, the cost is too great anymore. So those were in the heydays of where there was a budget, and you had, it was almost open ended, really. And you just can't do that today anymore. So my wife would say, what the hell? It's 3 days. You're still getting a drum sound? But when it came time to recording, you got down to business, and we knew what to do. We were well rehearsed, and we had played so much already live that we were ready to do it. We just, Joe was a great producer. I just don't know if I don't think he was the right producer for this kind of band. So there were certain things that were out of our control that could have been handled a little bit differently, or maybe a lot differently. But it was what it was, and it was that era, it was that time. So we probably left Detroit too early because our managers were out here in California. The record company was out here in California, and they said, "Oh, you guys should be out here." But we probably packed up and left too soon. So.
Did you have an opportunity to, even especially on the first album, did you have an opportunity to do a domestic tour to promote the record?
Well, yeah. There were after that, then we had something to promote, so we started opening for single acts, for Procol Harum.
Sure.
Jethro Tull.
Yeah, I love it.
The East Town Ballroom and the Grandy started bringing in big acts, so we could open for them. Open for Vanilla Fudge, or open for
Grand Funk or something, maybe.
No, Grand Funk actually came very much on the tail end of this whole Detroit.
That is fascinating. That's fascinating.
Yeah, and Bob Seger really didn't have his heyday till long after we left.
Long after.
Long after. He found a kata, in his songwriting, and it very much mirrored some of the music that I started to become associated with here in California.
Huh.
And I think he really fell into his zone, and he did a beautiful job writing some incredible music. So
it was more, but you were at the forefront, the MC5, Catfish. Those,
along with the MC5 and people like that. But when people think of Detroit, they pretty much think of MC5 and Iggy and the Stooges. And they rarely mention Savage Grace and some of the other bands that did very well in Detroit.
Was Baby Huey from Detroit, or was he in Chicago?
I don't know that.
You don't know that? Okay, because Dallas brought him up, but I think he was a Chicago guy. Your second record came out on Reprise. Did you guys actually, did any of your tunes find their way? Did any of your tunes get radio play once you actually cut them on?
One of the songs, I think we did it on the first record. Got radio play on the pop station in Detroit. It was "Come On Down with Me."
Come on down with me.
Yeah, and it was written after we played the second Atlanta Pop Festival. It wasn't the big first one.
It wasn't the Isle of Wight, yeah.
But it was a very big festival. And we went down there, and you might recall a band called Rare Earth.
Of course, dude.
Yeah, so I ended up playing with Rare Earth eventually for about a year.
Whoa.
But this was after they had, Pete the drummer and Mike Herschel, the bass player, had a falling out, and the other three guys in the band got the ownership of the name, so they had to find a new drummer, and this is, more history that, would take too long.
No, it's so perfect you bring this up, because can we do part 2 next week? We still have a lot more to get to, but we just cooked for an hour here.
That would be good for me, because I would enjoy doing that.
Why don't we just plan for the same time next Tuesday? Does that sound good?
I'll tell you what, Jake.
Yeah. I'll text. I'll text you, and then we'll just communicate through that. We'll figure it.
Probably would have to be the week after that.
All right, so let's let it breathe. We'll give it 2 weeks. 2 weeks from today, 3 p.m.
Okay, Jake. Nice talking.
Hey, man. Good to hear you, Larry.
Thank you.
Much love.
You
Peace.
have a good day, man.
All right, you too, man.